In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you, given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. Your briefing begins with the headline, DEI killed the CHIPS Act. The Biden administration recently promised it'll finally loosen the purse strings on $39 billion of CHIPS Act grants to encourage semiconductor fabrication in the United States. But less than a week later, Intel announced it's putting the brakes on its Columbus factory. The Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company pushed back production at its second Arizona foundry, called a fab. The remaining major chip maker, Samsung, just delayed its first Texas fab. This is not the way companies typically respond to multi-billion-dollar subsidies. What explains chip makers' ingratitude? In large part, frustration with DEI. Commentators have noticed that CHIPS and Science Act money has been sluggish. What they haven't noticed is that it's because the CHIPS Act is so loaded with DEI pork that it can't move. The Act contains 19 sections aimed at helping minority groups, including one creating a chief diversity officer at the National Science Foundation and several prioritizing scientific cooperation with MSIs, minority-serving institutions. A section called Opportunity and Inclusion instructs the Department of Commerce to work with minority-owned businesses and make sure chip makers increase the participation of economically disadvantaged individuals in the semiconductor workforce. Corporations, of course, want the best and brightest, especially in advanced chip making, manufacturing. They don't want to be coerced into hiring substandard contractors or below par workers, and so of course they're not wanting to take the free cheese and the rat trap. So this is something to look out for as a trend, and that leads us into international news. There's a Palladium Letter magazine article entitled Why Civilizations Collapse. There are several reasons, of course, but one of the principal ones, often overlooked, is the loss of social technology, the breakdown of intergenerational structures to pass on knowledge, like how in the Middle Ages Europeans forgot how to make lead, so they harvested it from thousand-year-old Roman sewer pipes, or in the late Bronze Age collapse when the Greeks forgot how to read for 800 years. Institutions often become non-functional due to the loss of key knowledge at critical junctures. Take, for example, the recent failure of the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, to reproduce a niche classified material known as fog bank that is necessary for manufacturing nuclear weapons. It took the NNSA 10 years and millions of dollars to re-engineer a material that their staff in the 1980s knew how to make. That knowledge never should have been lost in the first place. But in a dysfunctional society, such loss of knowledge becomes the rule. Attempts at reverse engineering do not always succeed, if they are even made. Civilizational collapse, then, looks like this dynamic at the scale of an entire civilization. A low-grade but constant loss of capabilities and knowledge throughout the most critical parts of our institutions that eventually degrades our ability to perpetuate society. There might be a sudden point where the superstructure gives way dramatically, such as occurred during the Bronze Age collapse, or there might be slow accommodation to this convergence to zero, as with the Byzantine Empire. In the book Thinking in Systems, Donella Meadows, who is a cybernetics expert, said that academia was the DNA of a society. And by that, she meant, it's the information transmission system from generation to generation. Once a society loses the capacity to transmit that information, and it doesn't have to be academia, tradition is a way to transmit information through generations. But if there's cultural disruption for any reason, say for instance, people stop going to church or people stop going to civic organizations, then the society will lose certain capacities. We're seeing this with the initial DEI article that we were talking about at first, where you have, boomers, back in the 80s who knew how to do things, and then you retire them and you bring in unqualified people, and there's a disruption, a cultural transmission disruption, and you lose capacities. And there was an old joke, and I hate to even repeat it because it's in such poor taste, but it was something to the effect of, why doesn't Poland have ice cubes? Because the old lady with the recipe died, right? We're actually living through that right now. We're losing the capacity to do things that we knew how to do in the 80s because we outsourced all of our industry. And, so we're seeing the results of the disruption of cultural transmission. And some people think that this might actually be on purpose. For instance, in Aristotle's Politics, he talks about how it's the job of the parents to educate the children, to pass on the skills. Like the blacksmith will teach his son blacksmithy, or the cobbler will teach his son how to make shoes. But he talks about in Politics in Book 5, in his section, How a Tyranny is Maintained, how the tyrant will always try to disrupt cultural transmission by discouraging civic institutions, discouraging people from getting together and open sourcing information. The tyrant is always terrified, and so he wants the population divided and conquered. And this, of course, destroys social technology. People are isolated, atomized, churches are gone, families are broken up. We see this in surveys of loneliness, where people, aren't able to connect with others, and we see civic institutions that are crashing in membership. And we see this propaganda of, you're all just individuals. You're an individual. Isn't that wonderful? An individual. And there's a certain loss there when people can't get together, can't commune like they used to with the old traditions. Like you see Germans with Oktoberfest, or in the Middle Ages, they'd all come out for the saints' days and they'd have feasts and everybody would get along, and, you could find the person that you're going to marry there, And so this loss of social technology leads eventually to civilizational collapse. With that, I want to introduce my guest who's going to be talking with me further about this. His name is Johannes Koenraadt. He's a writer and public intellectual who goes by the Great Johannes on TikTok. Thank you, Johannes, for coming on, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. So, how have you been?
I've been very well since the last time that we chatted, and I wanted to at the top of the show, I was talking about the loss of cultural transmission, social technology. Social technology would be an example, like, for instance, traditions in a society, and anything that passes down information intergenerationally. Like I mentioned Donella Meadows, who wrote the great book Thinking in Systems. She's a systems theory analyst, and she talked about academia as the DNA of a society because it's the information transmission system from generation to generation. And if you change the syllabus, you change the genetic code of the society, and that's what's happening right now. And one of the things I also mentioned was that we're losing technology because it's not being transmitted. There's been cultural disruption has taken place. They're tearing down statues. They're not teaching, children, for instance, cursive. There was an article about how it's not necessary to teach cursive writing anymore. Although our founding documents are written in cursive, in my country, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. And so these are little examples, but there was a nuclear power plant that they had lost technology that they had in the 80s. So you retire that generation of people, you bring in new people through, say, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs who are unqualified. And suddenly you lose, like, they had to reverse engineer something that cost tens of millions of dollars, a process that they knew how to do in the 80s that's since been lost. And so one of the things that you mentioned to me that you wanted to talk about was ASML, the advanced chip making company that's in the Netherlands. And they want more diversity. They're threatening to pull out of the Netherlands because the Netherlands wants them to hire Dutch people, God forbid. And they're like, no, we want to hire all these people around the world. But what that does, if you're not teaching your own populace how to create microchips, you're losing the ability to create microchips. If you're just grabbing an Indian or grabbing someone from Hong Kong and you're ignoring educating your own populace, by doing the shortcut of just immigration, you will lose those skills, as we're seeing happening now. So I just wanted to, after that long.
So I was talking to this about this topic to my Dutch audience or my TikTok channel, right? And so I mentioned to them, well, imagine these big companies. I think there's like a top 10 of like big Dutch companies all thinking of leaving the Netherlands for reasons of regulations and so on. They want these corporations to be more socially responsible, but the laws are so hard to enforce or so costly to enforce. Many of these companies are thinking, well, why don't we just move to Abu Dhabi or something, or move to the USA, for example, move operations out. But then I realized, well, wait a minute, if you do that, the smart people who are presently trained to do this complicated work, they're going to have to leave with these companies, right? They're not going to stay in the Netherlands if there's no more high-tech industry there, if we're shutting it down. And that will leave the whole population basically dumbed down. Why would we still need a high-class education, universities, programs, and so on, if you're not actually going to train those people to be able to work in their own country?
Hmm.
You're literally saying that the Netherlands is going to become a bit of a dumbed down nation if that were really to happen, right?
Yeah, and
And
there's
yeah,
practical implications. Yeah, like forgetting how to do stuff. Your society starts to fall
yeah,
apart.
yeah, and but that would change everything because the Netherlands is still pushing for mass immigration. We want to turn the Netherlands into something called the tri-state city. That is basically a fusion between the Netherlands, northern Belgium, and part of Western Germany into one big city called the tri-state city, 3 states, right?
Mhm.
And but then what are you doing? You're importing all these people, but there won't be jobs for them. Uh, so yeah, it's a bit, to me, it's a bit of a mystery. Like this seems to be like the collapse of complex societies we were talking
Hmm.
about. This is going so wrong. It leads to an end game that no one is really openly talking about other than us, of course.
Yeah, well,
So
God, finish.
no, that was it.
I was just going to say that one of the things when I was mentioning the loss of social technology is diversity. Diversity erodes social technology. Like there was a gentleman, he was a social scientist named Robert Putnam, and he wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And he sat on his data for 10 years. He was afraid to release it. He's a man of the left. And what he wanted the data to say was that when you get more diverse societies, everyone holds hands and there's rainbows and everybody loves each other and they all sing with acoustic guitars. What he actually found out was that the society breaks down. People stop doing civic engagement, they stop voting, they stop giving to charity, the societies tribalize, and the societies become very unlivable. Like there was Desmond Morris was another social scientist back in '68. He wrote a great book called The Human Zoo, and he did this wonderful documentary for the BBC some years ago. And he showed what happens in a diversity state. So he goes to New York City. He has an actor pretend to fall down and
Mhm.
collapse and faint, and everybody ignores him in the diversity state. He's ignored. The only interaction he has was when an African American mugs him, like uses his vulnerability to steal from him. He takes that same actor to Malta, which is a homogenous society. The guy
Mhm.
falls, immediately everyone rushes to help him. So you see the difference between a homogenous society where they help each other and a diversity state where it breaks down and people stop interacting with each other. Everybody's hiding in their apartments. Everybody's afraid of each other. And he even said there's a biochemical implication that the stress levels, they actually have stress belts that they can put on people and measure stress. When you're in a diversity state, you're afraid of getting mugged, you're afraid of getting raped, you're afraid of getting killed. It raises certain hormones in your body that lead to cancer, heart disease, all these things.
Wow.
And yeah, so I mean, this is so when they have diversity for economic reasons, they're forgetting the social system that is going to break down. And when that social system breaks down, you lose social technology, which leads to like a Bronze Age collapse type situation. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like in the West, we shake hands with our right hand usually, right? Unless there's a problem. But
Mhm.
if you have so many diverse people, some people don't shake hands, for example, but you don't know who it is. You can't see by looking at people's faces. Oh, can I shake hands with you, or should I bow, or should if it becomes overly diverse, meaning that so there's visual diversity. People can be racially different, but if the
Mhm.
culture is totally mixed and you don't know how to behave anymore, people will shy away from interactions, and that is the breakdown of the whole social world. I've even experienced myself personally when when I spoke English to somebody and they couldn't speak English, they preferred completely ignoring me rather than risking exposing themselves as someone who couldn't speak English. Like the
Mhm.
shame of not speaking English can be so powerful to some people that they simply retreat from social interaction at all.
Mhm.
So when things become multicultural and super diverse, people retreat first into their own ethnic group sphere, I suppose, and then
Mhm.
further back even into like just your family or something. At some point, you just don't want to go outside anymore, you know?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. There was a book called Tendencies and Tensions of the Information Age by Shemit and Curtis. And this was some years ago. And they talked about a post-industrial civilization versus an agrarian civilization. And they said a post-industrial civilization, like all the countries of the West, they have universalistic thinking. They tend to think, hey, everybody feels like me. My values are universal values, even when they're not.
Mhm.
It's almost a form of chauvinism, but they're very welcoming to outsiders. They're very xenophilic. And he said agrarian populations, by contrast, are very tribal, right? So he said that agrarian populations tend to have primary social relationships, right? So they essentially will hang out with their cousins, their brother, sister, mother, father. he said in the post-industrial population, they usually will talk. They'll talk more to people they don't even know than they will to their own parents. Like
Hmm.
they'll have an online friend that they talk to, or they'll talk to the waitress at the restaurant where they work. Far more than they talk. So they have secondary and tertiary social relationships rather than primary social relationships. And so what happens is a culture clash when you take universalistic people, the post-industrial people, who tend to be non-racist, and you put them with agrarian people who tend to be tribal and tend to be very racist. And that's what Shemin and Curtis said. They said the racism will not be coming from the post-industrial population; it'll be coming from the agrarian populations. That because their social system, they have more developed social technology. They don't have the physical, the commercial technology, but they have more developed social tech. So when you see like a kid in the Netherlands getting beaten up by migrants, and there's other Dutch people around, they won't help him. Their social technology has broken down. If you see the reverse, if you see them getting assaulted, all of a sudden the whole group comes together and they will attack the
Yeah.
one because their social technology is built up. Ours has degraded, where we're not defending ourselves, we're not defending our people, we're not defending our culture, and that's a function of the breakdown of social technology that we're seeing. So
Yeah. I was thinking about, yeah, that our people in the West should become more intolerant, and also, strengthen our own social cohesion for precisely this reason. If as individuals we cannot fight back against people who are more like a block together. So
mhm,
so basically, if we are ashamed to define who we are, if we are afraid to say this is who we are, you can treat us this way, but no differently. If we don't set the standards for how we expect other people to treat us, they're going to waltz right over us because they have their own principles, their own morality, their own religion. They will impose their ways on
mhm,
us, and we will always be in retreat, so to speak. We'll always be retreating from the conflict. We are afraid of causing a conflict because maybe our whole wealth is based on the fact that other people keep working for us. As, for example, that's why we have so many immigrants coming to the West. We need them, right? That's at least that's what they always say. But then if we are so afraid of harming their feelings that it might upset everything. But then you have already lost, really. You have already lost your culture. You're on the way out, so to speak. You're going to be conquered
mhm.
by another people, if to put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a system right now. Like I mentioned at the top of the program, the Aristotle in Politics, in Book 5 of Politics, he has a section called How a Tyranny is Maintained. And he talks about how a tyrant will always break up social cohesion. How the tyrant does not want civic organizations because he doesn't want the people coming together because they might collude against him, right? So he breaks up. He wants the people as separate as possible, right? So what they don't understand is in separating the people, you're disrupting cultural transmission and you will destroy your techno. Like I said, the technology that we had from the 80s is suddenly being forgotten, or how to make steel because we outsourced the ability to make steel. We, like my country, the United States, we used to lead the world in steel manufacturing with the Bessemer process and Andrew Carnegie. And so since the 70s, they've taken the steel manufacturing to China, and China is producing a far lower grade of steel that just melts, it just bends. If you like, there was a presentation I did recently with a mallet, like a sledgehammer from 1960 versus a
Mhm.
sledgehammer made today. And the sledgehammer made today, when they put it under a press, just crushed like clay, like nothing. And then the sledgehammer from the 60s was so strong it actually broke the machine. The pneumatic press could not press
Wow.
down on it. So we had better technology in the 60s than we do now because we've lost that technology. We've outsourced it, the global system. And so we're forgetting those skills. If you asked us to go out and build something, we couldn't build. And right now that's affecting our military, where we've forgotten technologies. We don't have enough bullets. If there's a hot war, they said that it's good. We have 2 weeks worth of bullets. We don't have the steel to make tanks or the steel to make airplane. Like all these parts that we rely now on China for, and we're getting these degraded kind of versions of our own technology, and our own people are ignorant now. I wanted to share something with you. Just bear with me one second.
All right.
Material evidence can provide something closer to objectivity, at least sometimes. The archaeological record shows that many large Roman cities were depopulated over the course of the 4th and 5th centuries AD. As indicators go, this is a fairly clear and obvious sign of a high urban society's decay. Indirect evidence corroborates this, such as the reduction in atmospheric lead pollution generated by Roman mining activity leading up to the collapse of the empire. If we assume that mining activity is related to economic production, this is a good indicator of economic decline. But even material evidence can be unreliable, since understanding it requires a high degree of contextual knowledge. The interesting question for the prospective collapse of our own society is this. If you were a late imperial Roman and someone told you about the ongoing decline in atmospheric lead, how would you process this information? Today, if we saw a drop in lead pollution, our first assumption might be that this is due to the advent of greener technology. Economic decline wouldn't naturally come to mind. So
Yeah.
basically what that is talking about is the Romans, right? Like they made lead, right? And I mentioned at the top of the show that the Romans, the Europe, when it went into the Dark Ages, forgot how to make lead. So people 1,000 years later were harvesting Roman lead because they had lost the technology, right? Their social technology had collapsed, and their social transmission had stopped. And so, that was, they can do core samples and tree samples, and they can see lead in the atmosphere at that time, and they can see it dissipating as the empire collapses, as their economic activity goes. We will show maps of, hey, China has all this pollution and India has all this pollution, but oh, look, the United States or Western Europe, they have very low rates of pollution, and we don't register that that's because we're declining. It's actually a decline in
Yeah.
our,
Yeah.
we're living through the collapse without realizing it.
Yeah, that's a very scary thought. Yes, the deindustrialization of Europe seems to be a very true, real thing in Western Europe. Western German economy is dwindling. They're an aging population, right? I think their median age is like over 45 in Germany, German population, and that's including immigrants, right? So they're very old. That means a very competent class of older people, say the people aged 50 to 65 or so, they're taking their knowledge and their skill set to the grave. And if they're not able to pass this on because they're going to go green and they're going to shut down coals, and they're going to they shut down nuclear in Germany, completely shut down, right?
Yeah.
They don't use nuclear power plants anymore, even though they're trying to build new ones in Poland. But yeah, maybe Poland is coming online as Europe's new big industry, but Germany, the notion of technology made in Germany being the best in the world, nobody believes that anymore. It's going down the drain. And what I notice is that, yeah, we bring in a lot of immigrants to Germany, for example, but they don't possess the skills required right now to take
Correct.
over the technology that is still there. So
Yep.
there's this, yeah, a ravine or a crevasse that cannot be bridged easily, and may not successfully be bridged in time, so that the new generation of immigrants coming in will not be able to take over the German industry and keep it running as it's supposed to be. And that's the end then. You're looking at deindustrialization, the loss of a culture, the loss of a people in this sense. Yeah, that's a really scary thought. I'm going to live through that here. So
Yeah. Well, this is the
nobody really,
danger.
yeah.
This is the danger of a political class, that they have short-term thinking. They don't have a long time horizon. So their short-term thinking is, let's keep the people separate. Let's not have social cohesion. Let's not have social technology. Let's break the people up, because if they're together, they might come against us because we're illegitimate, right? So we don't want this. So we're going to break them up. Like Karl Marx mentions that in Das Kapital. He mentions that businesses will do things at scale. They always want to do things at scale because it's cheaper, right? You'll usually get like a quarter off, the quarter power scale law, right? You can operate it at more efficiency, a quarter more efficiency at scale. He said they do it with everything except for labor contracts. With labor contracts, they don't want collective bargaining, right? Because the workers will have too much power. So they will actually do things less efficiently to give you each a different contract. Each worker has their own individual pay rate, their own individual contract, and that's a pain for them, but they do it because they want the people separate. They do not want them to come together. So our whole political system is about destroying social cohesion, destroying social technology, and they don't have the intelligence. We don't have a political class. Basically, you have an economic class, and then you were supposed to have a political class that did social systems, right? The economic class does economic systems, commercial systems. The politicians were supposed to do social systems. They were supposed to maintain the society, maintain the traditions, maintain the structure, like Hegel says that. He says that the Constitution of is the embodiment of the ethos of a people, and he said the only reason for a government is to ensure that the posterity of the people goes on into the future. So the politician is supposed to be preserving the social systems, the social technology. Instead, we don't have a political class anymore. Now we just have an economic class, and they're ignoring
Yeah.
the social structures that will inevitably lead to our decline, like diversity and keeping the people divided and conquered. You're starting to see the ramifications as airplanes are crashing. You're looking at people who can't build steel anymore, like nuclear power, people, you're starting to see fraying around the edges just a few years into this, since losing technology since the 80s, that's terrifying, and you wonder like when the adults are
Yeah.
gonna, come into the fore and take over, or are there any adults, or are we just, fated to go the way of the late Bronze Age collapse, the first history's first
Yeah.
globalism, you know?
Yeah. To what extent is it deliberate though? It's like, so these Western elites, may they simply be like exit scamming their population? So they're taking profit from their stock market and so on, and then they just don't care about the people at all. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's also, yeah. You mentioned that our political class doesn't exist, and they're not very bright. They
Mm.
don't come off as intelligent designers of the future. But compared to, I would say compared to China, I always felt that Chinese leadership, okay, they're authoritarian, this and that, but they come off as much more intelligent, much more robust in their planning, that we just don't do it. The West is responding to what is going wrong, and they're
Mhm.
trying to patch it up and fix it with temporary fixes, or and there's just no way that they can succeed in doing that. I think.
Well, I think they
Uh,
have social systems. Because they're a traditionalist society. Like our civilization is a more innovative society. And
yeah,
there's a guy, Talcott Parsons, he was a social scientist in the 40s, and he had something called social action theory. And he said capitalism actually erodes traditionalism because capitalism is always looking for new ways to do things. So it's always looking toward the future, and it's ignoring the past. Whereas China is the opposite. It's a traditionalist culture. So there was a dissident from China, and he said that in the West, the billionaires are here and the politicians are here. And he said in China, it's the
yeah,
reverse. He said the billionaires are subordinate to the political class. And if you cross the political class, they can take you out. And the billionaires know that. That is not true here. So we don't have anybody doing the social systems. In fact, we have people contemptuous of the social systems because they want to collapse the society. And I kind of wanted to get that. We're going to segue, if you want now, to
yeah, sure.
why this is happening. Why Weimar? Why are they turning the West into Weimar? Why are they pulling down all of our statues? And I think that there's a larger reason for that, and it goes into the British Empire, and they
Yeah,
want to reabsorb the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. But one of the things that they wanted to reabsorb was the Holy Land, and I wanted to kind of show you something. So this is about Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes
yeah,
was a British tycoon, and he wanted to you know, reconstitute the British Empire and reabsorb the United States. And it says, in his second will, written in 1877, before he'd accumulated his wealth, Rhodes wanted to create a secret society that would bring the whole world under British rule. His biographer calls it an extensive fantasy. Rhodes envisioned a secret society to extend British rule worldwide, including China, Japan, all of Africa and South America, and indeed the United States as well. And it says here, to and for the establishment, promotion, and development of a secret society. Now, what he's conceptualizing here is intelligence agencies, right? Like the CIA. In the 1870s, a secret society based on the Jesuits, he said. He wanted an inner circle and an outer circle. And it goes, the true aim and object whereof shall be the extension of British rule throughout the world, the perfecting of a system of emigration from the United Kingdom and of colonization of British subjects of all lands where the means of livelihood are attainable by energy, labor, and enterprise, and especially the occupation by British settlers of the entire continent of Africa, the Holy Land, the Valley of the Euphrates, the islands of Cyprus and Canada, the whole of South America, the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of the British Empire. And
all
so
right,
basically, he mentions the Holy Land. So he wanted like to reabsorb. He called them the settler colonies, right? He wanted the United States back, Canada back, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. And he said once he got that Anglophone bloc, then they would take over the world and they would have global federalism, is what he called it. And that's what the UN is. And so mind you, this is 1877. And they're talking about doing this and getting the Holy Land. So you look at basically World War II. Is when this all happens. In the 1870s, they were conceptualizing how do we get the United States back, and they said the best way to do it would be a treaty. And after World War II, they had the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And so that's 1949. In 1947, they had that secret society he mentioned called the CIA, right? That he's
Right,
funding
right.
to basically collapse the United States, get its sovereignty. You know, basically London is now in control of the US military, of the US economy through the Federal Reserve. If any politician tries to be a nationalist, he gets shot in the head. Ask, John F. Kennedy. So those are the three big things: 1947 CIA, 1948 Israel, and 1949
Yeah.
NATO. After that point, there is no America anymore. There's an Anglo-American empire. It has now been reabsorbed. And when you look at it through that lens, Israel really starts to look like an airstrip for the British Empire. Kind of, it was created pretending to be about Jews, but it really wasn't. That was just, window dressing. And it was really, now they have a satellite state in a very crucial petroleum producing region, of the world. And that's kind of how I see it.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting that you mentioned the airstrip. Someone else named it an an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the U.S. to project their power in that region.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Or the
prepared some
Anglo-American
questions. Yeah,
Anglo-American Empire. Yeah.
Anglo-American Empire. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, great that we segue into this, because I had prepared some questions for you about this. We can go into indeed 1948 and so on, these issues, but just to give me to help me understand the American reality here, like I notice there's a bit of a difference between the way we in Europe talk about Israel, because we are allowed to talk about the pro-Palestinian camp as well. So we see that our governments officially support Israel, but our media will show the victims from Palestine and so on. Now, I noticed recently there was a U.S. lawmaker, Kristi Noem. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's from South Dakota, where they passed a law where you're not allowed to criticize Israel, and it's equated to anti-Semitism. I thought that is so extreme. That does not exist in Europe. In Europe, we can't criticize the state of Israel or Zionism. Would you mind, giving us an impression of how important is Israel in the American media system? Like how did they sell you Israel, so to speak?
Well, there was a gentleman who he was the attaché of Bernard Baruch. Bernard Baruch was a billionaire from my state in the United States, South Carolina.
All right.
And Baruch was the guy who kind of recreated the United States. He did the New Deal. He invented the New Deal that FDR was later given, and created all these different sectors of the society, the government takeover of the economy. He pitched it to Herbert Hoover first, and Hoover said, "This is Mussolini's reforms from Italy. This is fascism. The Constitution doesn't give me the authority to take over the economy." And he was like, "Okay, we're going to get rid of you, and we're going to get FDR. He will institute this." So they reconfigure the entire United States government under Baruch. And so this gentleman, his name was Benjamin Friedman, and he was a young man at Versailles when Bernard Baruch was there. And he gives this real, in the 60s, he gave an expose, and he said that what happened around that time period was the World Zionist Congress went to England. And when it was clear that the Ottoman Empire was about to fall, they wanted to negotiate for Palestine, what was then called Palestine. And the British said, "Okay, we'll do this. We can make a deal if you can use your media influence to bring the Americans into World War I. If you can do that, then you get Israel." And that was the quid pro quo. And so Benjamin Friedman talks about like the backroom dealing, And so, very early on, F. Scott Fitzgerald, the American novelist in 1920, he talks about that. Initially, the American media was very pro-German until the World Zionist Congress made that deal with England. And then all of a sudden the media in the United States totally shifts into anti-German, and the Germans are bad, and they're bayoneting babies, and they're crucifying Belgians, none of which happened. They had, one of the most ridiculous things was they had a giant wooden rape machine, and they were going through the Belgian countryside with a wooden rape machine that was raping maidens. None of it was real. But yeah, that was the deal that they struck, that if we bring America into the war, and England lost. They effectively lost World War I until the Americans came in, and then it turned everything around. and that was the gambit. And so, yeah, ever since then, there had been a kind of quid pro quo between the British Empire and the Zionists, that they would basically use the Zionists for their influence. But you have to remember, most of what we see is like they're contractors. It's not entirely self-serving. A lot of the stuff that they do is for other nation states, and that's why they're
Mhm.
very reluctant to ever relinquish media control because it gives them such a trump card. But yeah, but a lot of the stuff that we see is actually British propaganda. Just to go back to that, there was a book I was
Yeah.
reading. It's called Dream Worlds of Race by Duncan
Yeah.
Bell. He's a British professor, and he said that in 1903, Andrew Carnegie, the billionaire here in America, he said, like Carnegie was working to reintegrate the United States into England. He was born in Scotland and he was sympathetic to the British Empire. And he was working. He was putatively an American, but he was really loyal to the British Empire. And he worked for 40 years to reintegrate them. And he said the only thing that would stop that would be the American antipathy to the British. They don't like the British. And he said in 1903 that we're going to have media campaigns to change their culture. And one of those media campaigns, he said, we have to make the Americans like the British. So all of a sudden, I'm looking back over my own past and I'm looking at the British invasion. I'm looking at the Beatles. I'm looking at Doctor Who and Monty Python and all
Uh-huh.
the stuff that was fed to us. And I'm realizing
Ah,
only
okay.
now that that was a psyop. So even though the Zionists were the vector via
Oh,
the media, they
wow.
were actually carrying the propaganda from somebody paying them. And it was the British saying, here, we're gonna, give you money, turn the American, so that's basically how our media works. It's not a media of the people. Americans really, it's not
Yeah.
done for American interests. So I don't know. That's my take on it. So
Yeah, so the way you explain it, the media system in the US is really there to promote geopolitical interests, to propagandize you with the Beatles.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. Or
yeah.
people notice that too. Like all these people were complaining. Every American show, and I don't know how much you know about our bad TV shows, but there was a time period where every lead character in a show was British, even though they were supposed to be Americans. Like there was a show called House
All right.
with Hugh Laurie, who was the lead, or The Walking Dead with Andrew Lincoln as the lead, and they would just have British person, British person, British person, British person, and it was just really weird. And you realize, like I said, that there's a design there, to integrate the two cultures. So we were told the British were awesome. And the British, meanwhile, were told Americans were awesome. And they were fed James Dean, they were fed Marilyn Monroe,
Yeah.
they were Elvis. And through this method, they meshed them culturally, And so I think Israel, in many cases, is almost irrelevant to like what's happening. We put a lot of emphasis on the Jewish question or anything like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean there are other higher players, I think, in my estimation. They're contractors, is my take on it.
Right. Well, yeah, that's an interesting view of Israel as a state serving, say, British interests, for example. So maybe we can go a little bit back to the beginning. Like, I remember reading the book by the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl. It's called
Mhm.
The Jewish State. It was a pamphlet originally published in 1896. And then in that pamphlet, he argues for the mass immigration of Jewish people into Palestine to be able to create the state of Israel, which is then founded in 1948, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
And you already mentioned that the British Empire was kind of supporting that development. Um, and so it has been kind of assimilating other Palestinian territories. Like Israel started small, it's been growing, it's been taking up all sorts of territories. Like, what can you tell us about this whole foundational period? Like, maybe in reference to the British Empire, like why then, and why was it so important to get Israel on the map, so to speak?
No, that's a great way to put that. Oh, by the way, just to go back to the topic of Cecil Rhodes, and when Cecil Rhodes wanted to reintegrate the United States and all the settler colonies back into the British Empire, he died. He was only 48 years old, and he
Mhm.
left the administration of his will to Lord Rothschild. And so Lord Rothschild was also behind the creation of the state in Israel. Um, in
Wow,
1919, the Balfour Declaration, so they're integrally and kind of eh, eh, connected to each
it's
other.
really connected. Yeah.
Yeah, and so but okay, the British Empire, if you watch the movie, one of my favorite movies of all time is Lawrence of Arabia. And in
Okay.
Lawrence of Arabia, which takes place in World War I, the British basically create something called, Arab pan-nationalism, right? They create a pan-Arab movement to destabilize the Ottoman Empire. So what they would do, they were very successful at, kind of using ethnicity to destabilize their enemies, right? Like the Kurds, they used the Kurds against the Turks. They used the Arabs against, against the Ottoman Empire. They, historically, they used Native Americans in my country against the European population. They brought in Caribbean Africans, all sorts of things that they would do. And but they, I'll give you another example. William Engdahl had a book called A Century of War, and the great economic rival to England was Germany. As Germany was rising up, they had to make sure that Germany couldn't get oil, couldn't get resources to industrialize. And so the Germans had built the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. And so the British created Serbian nationalism. Why did they create Serbian nationalism? Because the railway traveled right through Serbia, and then they had the Serbians blow up the rail. And so they would use little ethnicities to basically carry out as thugs, goon squads.
Mhm.
They're doing this right now in the Ukraine, right, where you have neo-Nazi groups
Yeah.
in the
The
Ukraine, and
Azov.
it's the same methodology, or the Mujahideen, right? That the radical
Mhm.
Islamic, Wahhabi sects, they did the same thing. They would always use ethnic kind of, small ethnic separatist movements, whether Georgians, whether, Kazakhs, whatever. And so Zionists were they were part of that kind of milieu. To understand their backing of the Jews at that time period, you have to understand that they also backed the Kurds for the same reason, or they backed the Arabs for the same reason. It's not that they liked them, it's that they were useful. And whenever you build a nation state, so two things were playing into this. One was that London wanted them to be ethnocentric, right? Wanted to encourage that, foster it, use it, and make them militant, have the Irgun going around as a terrorist organization, blowing things up. Secondly, however, when you create a nation, it is natural. It is the organic, kind of function of a nation where they're ethnocentric at the beginning of the creation of the nation. Like Bismarck had to do
Mhm.
that in Germany when he created the modern German state. He played up, hey,
Yeah.
we're all related to each other. He played up race. The concept of race was very powerful as a for social technology, as a way to make people cohere. You make them come together, and so there was a time period where it was so successful that the Jews turned on the British and they started blowing up the King David Hotel. They wanted the British out now. Like
Right.
after the British had kind of gotten them in, there were ethnocentric, Zionists who wanted the British now gone. I mean, that's been reversed since, the British are well embedded. Or I should say the Anglo-Americans. You think in terms of America, but really the Anglo-Americans, let's call them, are well entrenched
Right.
there. But that's
Right.
it.
Right. So, yeah, no, that's a very great explanation. So Israel can be seen as a sort of a contractor state that does things for others, for the British Empire and so on, the former British Empire. But there seems to be also some geopolitical value for its location close to, for example, the Suez Canal. Now,
Mm,
I know that
yep.
the French colonials used to be active in Egypt, and when they left, the British took over control of Egypt for a while, though not overtly. It was like a covert colonial project.
Mhm.
And that was for the sake of protecting the Suez Canal for their trade with, I assume, India. A lot of it was flowing through the Suez Canal to supply us, right? So, how important do you assess then Israel's army or Israel military proximity to the Suez Canal as some major international trade route, so that it
Yeah.
do they actually provide the service of protecting global trade in the benefit of, say, in this case, the British capitalists or so?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's
All right.
exactly what that is. For the British to maintain an empire, global empire, they need those trade routes open. And you notice like all the wars that they have, like in the Falkland Islands in the 80s, or why the British have Gibraltar and Spain. So all of these are ways that the British can
Yeah.
can bottleneck, trade routes so that they can get those tariffs, those duties, like that, all that money, all the money of the world flowing through there. So one of the things that's happening right now is the Chinese are talking about making a land, kind of artery, commercial artery called the Belt and Road Initiative or the New Silk
Yeah.
Road. If that happens and trade, kind of dries up, the seagoing trade, the 19th century model that we've been living through, that the British have been trying to maintain, actually an 18th century model, is going to take a huge hit. So if China succeeds, if Russia and China and the BRICS countries succeed, we're going to see Israel's importance diminish down to nothing. And a lot of people in
Wow.
Israel right now, one of the Israeli founding fathers, can't remember his name off the top of my head, he was worried about that. He said that no state that Jews had ever run had lasted more than like 70 years. And it was basically the shelf life of
Yeah.
Israel was already in question. Like the Soviet Union is an example, when they essentially take over the Soviet Union, 80 something percent of the Politburo is Jewish, and it lasts for 78 years and then collapses. Or the original Israel in the Bible, or Judea lasted for 70 years, collapses. And so they're looking at the shelf life of Israel, and they're very concerned about that. If the geopolitical map changes because of things that are happening in the global south right now, Israel's importance goes down to nothing. And yeah,
Wow.
it's going to be, the 21st century is going to be very, very interesting to see,
Yeah, so
how that
so
shapes up.
that's indeed the case in terms of trade. If trade would no longer necessarily flow through the Suez Canal, yeah, if that diminishes, it changes everything. Yeah, but Israel is also close to oil-producing nations like the Saudis,
Mhm.
Iraq, Iran, and so on. And the oil is also very important for the U.S. economy, for European economies. So
Mhm.
I have like a dual question here. It's like, to what, on one end, is Israel also there to kind of bully the Arab states into giving up their resources? Or is it perhaps also just that the American military industrial complex can make so much money of waging war that they're using the Middle East as a playground to start wars that they know are going to be profitable to them? So this is the matter. Like, did we do the Iraq war, for example, for the oil, or did we do it because the war was itself profitable?
Yeah, I see you're asking very, very good questions. That's one of the things that, like William Engdahl, I would encourage any of your listeners to read William Engdahl's A Century of War. And
Mhm.
basically it's all about oil. Everything is the control of oil.
Oh,
As you
yeah.
know, the United States relies on the petrodollar. That is coming into question. India recently, 2 weeks ago, made a deal with the Gulf states to trade oil and rupees. China had already done it with the yuan. So we're seeing the death of the petrodollar. Essentially what had happened was when they created a global empire, like in the 1950s, right after World War II, they said, we want this global empire, no more national sovereignty. We're going to do that global federalism Cecil Rhodes mentioned, and you can have one world or no world. So one world is everybody goes to the UN and is under the British Empire's control, through a shell corporation. Or we have a nuclear war and we all die, right? And so what they did ever since World War II is they started gutting and deindustrializing the West and shipping all of our, technology, all of our infrastructure out to build up China, to build up Indonesia, Vietnam, India, all these places. They'd siphoned out an estimated $50 trillion from the US worker.
Right.
And so people wonder, hey, why is American infrastructure falling apart, yet it looks great in Hong Kong, or the roads, and like you'll see memes where they'll have, like, salt flats in Hong Kong in 1990, and then they'll show it, today, with it looks like Manhattan. Well, where did all the infrastructure come from?
Yeah.
Where did the ports come from? Where did the road, the rail? And the answer to that is it came from the United States taxpayers. We were strip mined, and all of our money was sent out to build out this global grid. Now, here's the problem. Now that they have our technology, now that they have our know-how, and which we're losing, because of this, this brain drain that's happened. Suddenly they don't need us anymore. Suddenly, we're, like we said earlier, with looking at pollution maps, where all of a sudden, oh, isn't this wonderful? Look how there's no carbon emissions
Yeah.
from the United States or Europe. Well, carbon emissions are associated with industrial activity, like building steel. When you have steel, that releases carbon. Whenever you build something, it's carbon. So you're watching the economy of the West kind of collapse because our political elites, or let's say economic elites, rather, is more accurate.
Yeah.
They built out the rest of the world. So now the rest of the world doesn't need us so much. And the
Yeah.
petrodollar is now in question because now these other countries have the leverage to make their own deals with the Gulf states. And so, like I said, all of this is the ramifications for this are really bad for us. They're terrifying for Israel because Israel solely exists for that model that may be going away. You know,
Yeah, wow.
Western Europe, by the
That's
way, is
her.
going to get it before Israel, though. Western Europe right now is being gutted for your middle class is being robbed and looted
Yeah.
to pay for our collapsing economic system. And then after that, then it'll go to other colonies. And finally, lastly, it'll go to the United States. But yeah, eventually
Yeah.
Israel will get
Lucky,
it.
lucky me in Western Europe. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that Cecil Rhodes, that's like the founder of Rhodesia, right? That guy,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
He wanted to bring the Holy Land back into, say, the influence sphere of the British Empire.
Hmm.
Um, so, but by controlling the holy city, say Jerusalem, you are in some way able to get, say, Western Christians, American Christians, European Christians to side with Israel. Is the whole so is the reason of bringing the Holy Land into the sphere of influence of Britain meant then to be able to get at the tax monies of the Western middle classes, so that we feel like emotionally connected to Israel because of Jerusalem, and so we will be more willing to pay for, say, Zionism or wars in the Middle East or so. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a brilliant take. No, I never thought about it quite like that, but you're making a really good point there. What they usually do, like oligarchical classes, they will never say, "Hey, I'm changing this law to protect oligarchs." They will never do that. What they will
Mhm.
do is they will change the laws that benefit the oligarchs, but they will use what we call a stalking horse. A stalking horse is something fake. Like for instance, if I want the law changed so that I, as an aristocrat, can't get arrested, I'll say, "Oh no, no, this law is to help black people. This law is to help gay people." Right. But it'll have the effect of actually helping this oligarchical class. Like in the United States, the CIA changed our legal system. And they said that and this is a quote, they said the legal system should not be working for the majority, but should be re-engineered to work for a minority. Right. And the minority they actually wanted it to work for is the oligarchical class. Right. But they'll tell you, oh, it's for a racial minority or a sexual. And where I'm going with this is when the British Empire does something, or now the Anglo-American Empire does something, it's not going to say, hey, we're doing this for the Anglo-American Empire and for power and money. No, they're going to say, oh, we're doing this for black Jews. We're doing this for Jews. And that's why we want this airstrip in the Middle East. It's for our sentimental connection to the Abrahamic religion. And they don't care at all. Cecil Rhodes did not care at
Oh
all
wow, yeah.
about any religious significance or anything. It was pure geostrategic. It was what do they say? There's that cliche. The most important thing in real estate is location, location, location. And it
Mhm.
was just about location. It was just how do we get this in here and then make it seem sympathetic, So we'll have this group and we'll pretend it's all about helping them because we're such good philanthropists. We're just altruists, But really, it's a false front. It's a stalking horse,
Yeah.
And I think the Jews are very well aware of that. But you make another point, and I'll just real quick. I'll hit this because I'm talking too much. But
Okay.
there was somebody made a wonderful point. They were talking about why monotheism? Why does monotheism take place? And he said that when you have a society, a civilization with a lot of gods, that the money, like when you tithe, when you give money to like a particular sect or a cult or a god, it's diffuse, right? It goes all over the
Mhm.
place. So what a tyrant usually wants to do is create one religion, one God, because then it pulls all the money into one place, and now he has access to a much
Yes.
larger slush fund, and you ban all the other religions, and you create. So what you just said kind of reminded me of that when you said, like getting the Christians behind it. You're essentially
Uh-huh.
using that methodology. You're creating a slush fund. All these Protestants, all these people who send money to help
Yeah.
the
Slush
Israelis and
fund.
the
Yeah.
Bible. Yeah, and they're just getting played.
Yeah. Exactly. You mentioned that Israel may be at risk of collapsing anyway due to the changing global situation, but Israel also has some enemies. Like something that I find a bit hard to understand is what is, for example, if you look at the Arab world itself, they oppose the existence of Israel, but why is that then? And I don't quite understand how Russia views Israel. I know there's a lot of Russian-speaking Jews living in Israel, so there may be already some kind of internal conflict there anyway. So why is it that the Arabs would want Israel to leave? What do they gain by taking back Israel, for example?
I don't think, yeah, I'm like, you make a good point for like your first
Yeah.
point about so many of the Israeli founding fathers were from Poland and Russia.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so Israel was a very socialist state. It was basically a socialist government. Their first connections were to the Eastern Bloc, not to the West. They got all of their munitions from Hungary and communist countries and stuff like that. They were very solidly in the East because of their ethnological ties to Eastern Europe, the Ukraine, and all those things right now. I mean, it's still happening. As to the you have to remember, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, most of those like Hashemite kingdoms and stuff like that, like the Jordanian king isn't actually Jordanian. He was put on the throne by the British, So like once
Oh,
again, the British kind of and the French, they carved up
wow.
these regions, they created these fake countries, they put, different people, ethnic groups that had nothing to do with each other. So I don't think that they really do care that much about Israel. I
Mhm.
think that what's happening is we're watching one of the chapters in this book that I mentioned about the British Empire was the Americanization of the world, right? And so what does
Mhm.
that mean? So America has a particular model, a control model, and one of those models is that you can weaponize ethnic minorities to attack the host population, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Israel, like how easy would it be for Israel? I mean, really, to use America's power and all the money that they have at their disposal to basically give $1 million to each Palestinian, move them 50 miles into Jordan or Lebanon, right? Give them all a mansion and a million, $10 million
Yeah.
dollars. It would be far cheaper than how they're living. But the thing is, the Mossad doesn't want that, right? The Mossad
Mhm.
basically wants an angry population that they can weaponize against their own population and use
Oh,
to
wow. Yeah.
do repressive legislation. And so they've created America. They're recreating America in the Middle East. They're doing this right now in Europe, where they want no-go zones. They want large Muslim populations in there.
Mhm.
So just like America, they can just push a button. The media starts telling the ethnic minorities that the host population owes them and are evil, and it's okay to attack them, and the oligarchical class is safe. Now they have a mercenary army. And this is one of the dangers of the Americanization of the world. They're remaking these once stable civilizations, and they're taking away,
Mhm.
like we said at the top, the social
Yeah.
technology is breaking down, and so yeah,
Yeah.
long story short, I don't think the Arabs care about Israel. I think they're paid to do whatever
All
the
right.
CIA
Right.
tells them.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I think that might be true. Yeah. I have only like a few more questions. Like I was wondering, like, so Israel may collapse on its own, right? But do you think there's a point where the British or the Anglo-American Empire itself would want to cut loose from Israel if it becomes like a liability in some way or so? Because I think the Roman Empire once at some point was benefiting from Judea, but then they cut loose from it. Do you think this history might repeat itself, that the Anglo or the British themselves might want nothing to do with Israel all of a sudden anymore?
Well, I saw there was something I read like years ago, like 20 years ago, and it was the Rothschilds of all people, and they were
Mhm.
talking about abandoning Israel as a project, as an enterprise. You have to remember that Israel is really the dream of like middle class Jews, the upper
Yeah.
wealthy class. They don't care. They're sociopaths, just like our rich people. They don't care about our
Yeah.
populations. They're
Exactly.
sociopaths.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the Rothschilds were talking because they were causing so much disruption with energy policy. And these are not people who have a sentimental connection to the land of the magical book, the holy book. They don't care,
They
just
don't
like any
care.
more than Cecil Rhodes cared about that. So yeah, and you're right. I mean, there are factions in the West that are, kind of they think that the people running Israel are incompetent. Like right now, there's talks about a coup against Benjamin Netanyahu. There's rumors of a coup to remove him and to install somebody who's going to kind of, ameliorate the situation and bring peace in. So it's very unstable. And so the West doesn't like instability. And if Israel is
Right. Right.
showing that it's too unstable, then yeah, there's always that risk. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be just that once the West collapses, Israel is going to have to recalibrate. And they're going to, and right now it looks like they're making relationships with the BRICS countries. They're
Mhm.
already kind of trying to pivot into this new future because they don't see a long future for the Atlanticist power
Yeah.
grids.
Um, I think I have one more question for you relating
Yeah.
to this Israel matter. Is the conflict itself, right? Without picking a side, whether you're pro-Palestinian or pro-Zionist, it has exported itself to the world and greatly influenced politics elsewhere, to the point where we in Europe now, for example, we have, and in the US, as I mentioned, Christy Noem, they're passing laws against anti-Semitism, but also simultaneously against anti-Islamophobia, for example. But we don't have specifically such laws for, say, anti-Catholicism. We don't have
Yep.
that, or
Correct.
anti-Europeanism, right? So it's almost as if there's a class of people that is able to lift itself above our laws. They receive extra special protection that we do not receive. And that, I think, is going to lead to the breakdown of the social fabric.
Yeah, you don't respect, but you remember what I said about stalking horses, where the oligarchical class will make a law that they pretend is about gay people or trans people or black people or Jews, but it's actually just suppression. It's enacting,
Right.
repressive legislation to protect themselves. So don't take Christy Noem's, her. There's the apparent and the real, right? So she's giving you the
Yeah.
apparent reason, but really it's just about censorship because they're afraid of the population. They know they're illegitimate, and they're very nervous.
Right.
They're afraid of the people coming together. So their whole game plan is what the CIA calls a strategy of tensions. A strategy of tensions is how you divide and conquer a populace, and they're doing it. It's wonderful for the short term for them. But like we said earlier, the long-term implications of doing that is that you've destroyed the social technology of the civilization. It collapses and they're not smart enough. Like they don't have any
Yeah.
historians coming in. They don't have any systems theory people coming in. They just have people with a very short time horizon of divide and conquer. And isn't it wonderful how we're dividing everything? Okay, well, that's how you destroy a system. Do you not realize that? And I don't think they do. I don't think we have any adults.
No,
I wanted to, if I may, do you have one more question, or because I wanted to pivot and
no,
share.
I'm done with my questions about Israel. So,
Okay. Well, I wanted this plays into it. I'm starting to see some dangerous kind of implications of something, a shift. Like I said, the pendulum swings all the way one way and then the pendulum swings all the way back. And there was a book called Pawns in the Game by a guy named William Guy Carr in the 50s. And he wrote about a bunch of revolutions, starting with the French Revolution and how they did it. And he said they had a synthetic famine to start it to destabilize the population. They released the criminals, the nihilists, the psychopaths. They caused all this disruption in the society, and they used that as a way to collapse the monarchy. They take over, but one of the things they did, that was the destabilization phase. Then they had to stabilize the society. And then once you stabilize the society, you bring in the people to basically kill the people who were oppressing the population, right? So if like for right now, we have ethnic minorities beating people up or raping,
right,
and,
right.
and
Yeah.
because we're in a destabilization process. What is likely to happen and what has historically happened is they will do nationalist movements. Like I said before, they will use ethnicity, right? They will tell Arabs, unite, Arab pan-nationalism, Slavic pan-nationalism, Kurdish nationalism. And so they're doing this with Ukrainians, neo-Nazi, they don't care.
Right,
It's
right.
not about ideology. It's about, who they can use to do what at what particular stage. And I've noticed that there are little changes. There was a Colonel Douglas McGregor in my country, and he just came out of nowhere maybe 2 years ago, and he started saying all the right things. He started saying that globalism, was dangerous and it wasn't serving the Western populations. He started saying that our elites were incompetent, and just recently he began talking about creating a movement or having this movement called Our Nation, Our Country, Our Choice was the movement. And he said, well, there is an American people, but they're not being served. They're being oppressed. There is an American people.
Ah,
And the more he starts talking about that, he starts sounding very, like, okay, like I said, with the French Revolution, first you have the crazy rapists and murderers and criminals oppressing the population.
right,
Then
right.
you have the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
killing them. You have Weimar, then you have the reaction to Weimar. And so as Douglas McGregor was saying that, like it was almost like he was recruiting kind of the reaction. And that comes into the two events that kind of make me wonder. And let me show you this one thing. Led by Musk, Silicon Valley inches to the right. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so that's one sign that these people have been given the go ahead to kind of we're starting the pendulum might be inching the other way. And another thing that came to my mind was that YouTube, which is highly censored, is allowing Hitler speeches and AI to
Yeah.
be released. And I'm just going to play like just a second for you.
We cannot take them unless Germany is prepared to allow them a certain amount of capital to bring with them as immigrants. For hundreds of years, Germany was good enough to receive these elements, although they possessed nothing except infectious political and physical
But
diseases.
the reason why I played that is because why would YouTube allow that on? Right? Why would YouTube allow Americans and Westerners in general, English speakers, to hear the speeches of Hitler? They've never allowed Hitler's speeches to be translated. Like if you watch them on TV, they're always in German. They hope the population can't understand them, but now they're making it available. And just
Right.
as they say, Silicon Valley might be inching right, and Douglas McGregor is out there. I'm starting to see around the edges. Like there was this one, hold on a second. There was this one meme.
Chad, working class man.
Yeah, they're starting all of a sudden you're seeing, they're laying the groundwork for a movement to come to stop the oppression of the people, and people are being oppressed right now. They're being discriminated against for their race. They're being, shunted out of jobs that they're qualified for by unqualified people. They're suffering. We have the highest suicide rates in the world in the United States. And Dr. Ann Case of
Absolutely.
Princeton, she said it's because of the death of the white working class, where they can't get jobs, they can't get hired. Since COVID, they changed with the diversity, equity, and inclusion projects. All 94% of all jobs went to ethnic minorities. So you had the entire host population vying for 6% of the jobs because they won't hire them. They have algorithms in human resources departments that if you're of European extraction, they do not allow your resume to be seen by the human resources people. So you can't get hired. You're being discriminated against,
Yeah.
right? So they're being oppressed like in stage one of the French Revolution or stage one of Weimar. And I'm seeing kind of like that the powers that be might be going from a
Yeah.
destabilizing period to a stabilization period, which is going to look
Yeah.
very
The
ugly.
contours of a new movement are there. Yeah. It's funny
Yeah.
that uh, I was thinking if I would start a movement, I would have called it the reaction. So, yeah, I do feel like I do have like one worry is like, is this real or is it controlled opposition? Like I worry that they might send Europeans to die against Russians and rather than take on, say, the problems we have with immigrants or so. So are they really going to help us survive in Europe, or are they going to divert our energy toward their own goals again that I don't even know what they are? So
Yep.
that's why I myself would love to play some role in it, because I know at least I will actually care about, strengthening my own people here in Europe and making sure that we are going to have a future here.
Very
Not
ethical.
necessarily because I don't want, well, we might become minorities, but then we simply reconvene somewhere, maybe, I don't know, Eastern Germany or wherever. You start a new nation that cares about its people, for example. I don't know how extreme the future will be, whether white Europeans will become minorities in the continent or not. But I do support these movements, but I see so many movements that I would call controlled opposition. Like, I don't know what their true motives are. Like, are they just using us to do other things on the global political
Yeah.
stage? And
It's a
that
psyop.
worries me a bit.
That's why
Yeah.
Colonel Douglas McGregor, it's military op, so he's
Yeah, it's a
pretending
psyop. Yeah.
to be, yeah, I'm so sympathetic to these marginalized, young males, military age males, hopefully. And then they're going to be able to control it, because if they don't control it, then it might spin out of control and an organic movement might happen and they'll lose power. So they have to do something very close to that looks like the organic movement, but isn't. I think Hitler was a psyop. Like when you look like just to go back to Dream Worlds of Race, they mention in there that the one thing that could have stopped the Anglophone empire from developing was a pan-Germanic state. They explicitly say that. They said the only thing that could stop the British was a pan-Germanic state in Central Europe happening. So Hitler comes in and discredits the idea of a pan-Germanic state. Another goal that the British had was separating Germany from Russia. Right? They said if Germany ever gives its technology to Russia and Russia gives its cheap energy to Germany, the geopolitical center of the world will move from the Atlantic, where it was for 500 years, to Eurasia. Right? And so Eurasia will get powerful and England will turn back into a backwater. It will be poor again. We have to stop Germany from interacting with Russia. So what does Hitler do? He builds an iron curtain between Germany and he rails against Slavs. Oh, these bad Slavs. And if you look at Hitler's history, there's very, very strange things. Like when he has the British Navy cornered and he can destroy them all and he lets them go. And they call that the miracle of Dunkirk. And and people always wonder why did the Germans let them go? And they say, oh, well, maybe Hitler was just sympathetic because the English were fellow Teutons. And, that's what played into it. Or maybe it was just a miracle, or Hitler was working for the British. Hitler was an agent. We know for a fact that he was in military intelligence, like Douglas MacGregor. So he basically creates a movement that mops up. He was sent as a spy to report back to German intelligence subversive movements. And then, according to the official narrative, is that he goes native and he breaks away from military intelligence and he starts believing and he creates this movement. Or did he? There's his sister-in-law wrote, like, Hitler had a half-brother named Alois Hitler, and he moved to Liverpool, to England. And there's a diary from Alois's wife, who was Irish, in England. And she said that young Hitler went to England. And so there's like a couple of years where Hitler is unaccounted for. So did he go to England, get kind of turned, and then get sent back in? I mean, this stuff was happening. They did this with Trotsky and Lenin. Like the intelligence agencies, it was all synthetic. All this stuff is synthetic, and they'll use like these groups, like military intelligence, to create these kind of racial nationalist movements that serve their wider geopolitical goals. So Hitler served two big goals. Like I said, he destroyed the idea of a pan-Germanic state, right? Discredited it, and then he put up that separation line between the East and the West, cutting Russia off. And he served British interests. So I think the same thing is going to happen with the Douglas MacGregor movement, that they might get angry young men, and they might actually do a cleanup of the destabilization of society.
Yeah.
But it might be because of what we talked about earlier. We will collapse if we don't have social technology, if we don't have a cohesive, coherent civilization, and they know that. So maybe they'll do it for that reason, but yeah, we're gonna be going into some dicey areas soon. So
you're right. Like, the one thing that worries me the most is if they would have this synthetic right-wing movement in the West, mopping up the right-wing men, but then sending us to kill each other off, as in World War I, World War II. The white Europeans and the white Russians kill each other off, purge each other off, and then actually the immigrants come in and basically take over this time.
Africans.
That is something I would definitely want to prevent from happening. Yeah, that's my main concern.
There's going to be 3 billion Africans by the end of the century. 3 billion, and they're planning on flooding them.
Yeah, we should do whatever we can to have these organic movements to prevent that from happening. So I don't know how. Well, we don't have billionaires backing us, that's for sure. But
No. Well, we may soon, like I said, like when you look at Elon Musk, the role he's playing, or Silicon Valley inching to the right.
Yeah.
If you look at YouTube, you have to remember, these people, they don't have a conscience. They're contractors. They're given orders by the people above them, right? So they're gonna channel the society in any direction that it needs to go for their wider, geostrategic interests. But yeah, I mean, we're probably going to go into a cultural shift soon. And who knows what's going to happen. But anyway, let's end that here, Johannes. And how can people get in touch with you?
They can go to my website at www.jmk.info. It's my Substack newsletter, or at the Great Johannes on TikTok. So
awesome.
That's where they can find me. And thanks for speaking to me. And I think you really clarified the Israel matter to me. I kind of really understand it better now. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Johannes.
Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.